Alright, now for my yearly Walking Dead video. Let's see what we have this year. Hello, this is Daniel Mart back again. I'm an actor and filmmaker based out of South Florida, and for this video, for this year, on October, I want to discuss The Walking Dead, Dead City. So, in the past few years, the past 5 years basically, ever since The Walking Dead Season 11 ended, we've gotten a number, and I do mean a number of different spin-offs with several different characters. The two biggest ones being The Walking Dead, Dead City, which features primarily Maggie and Negan and their story while they travel throughout all of New York and try to figure out what's going on there. That's one story. And then the other biggest spin-off that we've had is The Walking Dead, Daryl Dixon. Actually, their Season 3 finale literally just aired last night. That's how recent I'm doing this video. And I kind of needed to wait till last night to do this video for a very specific reason. But on top of that, we've gotten a few other spin-offs. The Ones Who Live, of course, where we saw what happened with Rick and Michonne after they left Alexandria, essentially, to put it lightly if you haven't seen the show, and how they're trying to get back to Alexandria. So we got that, as well as Tales of the Walking Dead, which is an anthology series where it's 6 episodes, and every single episode focuses on different stories from around the Walking Dead universe, usually with new characters. However, there is one episode that does feature Alpha and Lydia from the original Walking Dead series. Why am I mentioning all these series? It seems that the general consensus is the fact that Tales of the Walking Dead is the weakest of the new spin-off shows, which to a certain degree, I'm not denying, but I also find the comparison just a little bit unfair, if I'm being completely honest with you. And as you've seen from the title of this video, you see where my loyalty, so to speak, lies. Although, yes, Tales of the Walking Dead is kind of a failed experiment in a lot of ways. I think the way they handled Tales of the Walking Dead wasn't really well done, and if I'm being honest, and to be a bit more contrarian and kind of a hot take in this one, I actually think that the episode that features Lydia and Alpha is actually the worst episode in that series, which I know a lot of people are like, why? Because several reasons. Because a lot of people actually say that's the best episode. For me, it's actually the worst episode, ironically enough, to be even more contrarian, to throw out more hot takes. I don't know, maybe I'll do a video on that if Tales of the Walking Dead Season 2 ever happens, or the more Tales of the Walking Dead series that's always looming around the corner. If that ever happens, maybe I'll discuss that episode, but besides the point. So generally speaking, Tales of the Walking Dead is usually seen like the ugly, step-sibling of the entire Walking Dead franchise. To a certain degree as well, The Ones Who Live, that was kind of a failure as well. It's one of those things that was very disappointing in the way it panned out. It's definitely a series that should have been longer. It was always meant to be one season. Originally, it was going to be 3 movies, and then they realized, hey, we can't really feasibly do that, so they decided to do the series, a one season. But it's one of those things that it really should have been more than 6 episodes. It should have been like 8, maybe 9 episodes, to be honest with you, to flesh out, especially that ending that felt very rushed. But again, that's neither here nor there, and that's not really what I want to talk about. Again, the title of the video is basically going to be Dead City. But I also have to introduce those 2 shows, plus Daryl Dixon, as well, where basically the Daryl Dixon show, where it's him and Carol in Season 2, them traveling throughout most of Europe, or many countries in Europe, between France, England, and Spain, and them just trying to get back to America, and them always finding themselves in trouble with the somewhat remaining political powers that remained in Europe, because I guess Europe actually more or less knew how to handle their crap when it came to the apocalypse, unlike here in America and to a lesser extent Mexico, which we saw in Fear the Walking Dead. How they're battling the power of the living up in France, how they're battling the Alcazar down in Spain. So that's all great. I'm with the consensus that Daryl Dixon is the best spin-offs. Now, it's not perfect. Season 2 kind of went a little bit down by the wayside, if I'm being honest with you, but Season 3 really brought it up. So what's my issue exactly with Dead City? I could give you the same tired traits, excuses, critiques that everybody is saying, has said for the past, I don't know, 3 or 4 years, whenever Dead City Season 1 came out. It's like, why is Maggie still going after Negan? Why are they battling? Which is honestly the biggest critique, like, why are they still battling after all these years? Now, there is an episode in Season 1, and I think they kind of build upon it in Season 2, if I'm not mistaken, where Negan straight up says, hey, you don't have to forgive me. Even though at the end of The Walking Dead in Season 11, there's a conversation between Maggie and Negan where Maggie says, I forgive you. It's one of those things like she said, but she didn't truly mean it. She probably thought she meant it at the time, but it's one of those things that's still clearly affecting her all these years later, which I'll also get to that in a bit. So it's one of those things I really like, that moment where Negan's like, hey, you don't have to forgive me. I get it. I killed your husband. I made you a widow. I had your kid become an orphan, essentially. I've killed so many people that I get it. You don't have to forgive me, but, what are we still doing after all this time? I actually really like that, and I think that's a scene that really needed to happen, because that is the major question with the series, with Dead City. Why are they still going after each other? We understand if Maggie, for one reason or another, can't move on. I actually do understand that. I think it's kind of a weird critique to give, that the fans are giving to Maggie, like, oh, after all this time, why can't she forgive him? I'm like, honestly, I understand if she doesn't ever want to forgive him. And I think having that scene makes sense and actually alleviates some of the stress, so to speak, that the fans have on the situation. So I think that's a good thing. But one good thing does not just magically make the whole series have a purpose. Does not magically mean that the series is now fantastic and great. No. There are a bunch of other issues with the writing as well, outside of the whole relationship between Negan and Maggie. There's Herschel, who just flip-flops a lot between his mental state, and I think that's something they haven't really explored in the correct way. If I'm being honest with you, I think it's an interesting take to have on Herschel, but I just feel like there's a different way they could have explored it in a more tactful way. Because right now he's just very much coming off as just your regular angsty, angry teenager. And to a certain degree, I do understand where he's coming from, but I do think there's another way they could have done that and shown that angsty teenager archetype, where it doesn't have the fan base kind of almost hating Herschel, if I'm being honest with you. The main reason I think Dead City kind of just fails as a series, and it's something that I haven't really seen anybody really talk about, so I'm going to throw in my 2 cents here, and it kind of does go with the writing, but in a larger space, and that is just the overall world building of the series. The overall world building of the series is just complete crap. It's crap on a silver platter. It's like this. You are traveling to New York, one of the most populated cities ever. I understand that the apocalypse did a heavy number on the population of New York, just as it did on the population of the entire world. We get it. Between the zombie apocalypse, between people killing each other, between Operation Cobalt, which is the military actions that they did to try to contain the virus before it went ballistic, so to speak, between all that, between the bombings and everything else in between, and between the fact that it's also been, at least in Dead City's timeline, 20 years. That's the thing. Dead City has the furthest timeline. It's the furthest place in the timeline at 20, 21, 22 years. That's the thing. Daryl Dixon, it's in like year 15, 16, I think. Between 14 and 16, I want to say. Tales of the Walking Dead spans between the first 10-ish years, depending on the episodes. Between the first 10 years, give or take. The Ones Who Live, it's like in years, I don't know, 12, I want to say. It's just shortly after season 11. You know, so it's in like year 12, year 13. Dead City is on year 20, and I think that also alone failed the series a lot. The Ones Who Live happened several years before this. Daryl Dixon happened several years before this. Yet you're telling me that none of whatever happened in these series, granted, even though some of these series like Daryl Dixon hasn't ended yet, you're telling me they haven't retroactively affected Dead City? Or Dead City, I mean, I understand that the way filmmaking works, production works, you don't know what's going on from one series to the next, and the way it's formatted here, but it's one of those things like you would hope that as the series are catching up from season to season to season, you would hope they would try to incorporate some of the lore from some of the other series into their series. Maybe not in season 1, but maybe in season 2 and season 3 when it comes out. But no, it seems like they're just containing it to its own little thing. That's not what Daryl Dixon is trying to incorporate stuff from the larger Walking Dead universe. The Ones Who Live, Tales of the Walking Dead, they were trying to incorporate stuff from the larger Walking Dead universe. Dead City does not try to incorporate almost anything from the larger Walking Dead universe. If anything, it's actually trying to effectively cut itself off from the rest of the Walking Dead universe. There's a whole question as to why is Maggie's group living in the bricks instead of the hilltop colony? And they gave an explanation which it makes so sense, but it's also one of those things, okay, cool, but then are you no longer connected to the rest of the coalition, given what's going on, given the fact they're about to go to war against like New Babylon and the Burazi up in New York? No, you're not. For whatever reason, you've effectively cut yourself from the coalition for whatever reason. And now you're part of New Babylon, which makes no sense. That makes no sense. And by the way, I also kind of just don't like New Babylon in the way... New Babylon in and of itself also just feels like a lot of forced world building. That's the thing. I just do not like the world building of Dead City at all. Some of the things that when they do try to expand, it just feels very forced. Like, I feel like New Babylon is some of the most forced world building thing they've done. You're telling me that we didn't know there's a community up there in Virginia, or like a network of communities up there in Virginia, even though we've spent our whole time in Virginia. Now, granted, I think it's in that North Virginia area, and the characters typically wouldn't have had a reason to go to North Virginia, but New Babylon from like season 1 has always felt like such a weird world building thing. And something that didn't help also is the location of the bricks. In season 1, It was originally claimed that the bricks was located in that North Virginia area. But then it was stated that it was actually, no, it's actually located in like New Jersey, or like right outside of New Jersey. And that's the thing, if it's right outside of New Jersey, that means the CRM from the ones who live should be nearby, more or less. And then they said, oh, never mind, no, you guys are right, it's actually in Virginia. So I'm like, so which one is it? In Virginia or is it New Jersey? Like, they can't keep the road building set for whatever reason for Dead City. And again, as I was saying, for New Babylon itself, the New Babylon Federation, which is like the coalition, like the Commonwealth, like the CRM, another big network of communities, like Padre and from Fear the Walking Dead as well. It's one of those things that, yes, are based out of Virginia, Northern Virginia, but they also have settlements up in New Jersey, going as far down as Tennessee. For me, New Babylon is such a weird thing because the way they've built it up and set it up, it's like, you're telling me this is such an expansive network of communities, but we don't really see anything expansive of it. And it's just very weird the way it's been formatted and the way it's been handled. On top of that, which is something I touched upon just earlier, again, you're in New York. You're going to New York City. Well, again, one of the most populated cities ever. And you're telling me there's like barely any characters there? I actually did the math here, and I'm actually going to read from my computer here. Now, I kind of divided this into a few different aspects, from named scene characters. So like, if the character appears and they have a name, like, hey Frank, hey Sophie, hey Donna, whatever, whatever the name is, that's one character. So I separated that between named scene characters and unnamed and unseen characters. So if the character is just there, but he doesn't have a name, he's just like, hey, bodyguard, he's just like bodyguard number 56, he goes in that category. If the two characters are talking and they're like, oh yeah, Robert, he's up in the bell tower, but we never see Robert, I put him in that category. It's stuff like that. Furthermore, I'm also not counting characters that we've already seen from different series, with one exception, to be honest with you. So that, in this case, I'm not going to count Maggie, I'm not going to count Negan, I'm not going to count Herschel, I'm not going to count Annie. I am going to count Joshua, his son, because we technically did see him as like an ultrasound in the main series Walking Dead, but like, we saw him physically finally in Dead City, so I kind of counted that one, but that's like the only exception to this. That's basically my thing. I decided to count what are the characters that were introduced in each series and by season, and honestly, the math is shocking. Again, you're in New York City, and you're telling me you've barely introduced any characters at all? Like, here's the math that I have. In Dead City Season 1, they introduced named characters 18, unseen and unnamed characters 37. So they introduced more unnamed characters, like, again, bodyguard number 56, and like, hey, Roberto and dialogue, but they never actually showed Robert. They introduced more unnamed and unseen characters than they did actual physical named characters on the show. And in total, they introduced 55 characters in Dead City Season 1. In Dead City Season 2, they physically introduced, with named characters, 21 characters. And then they mentioned 14 characters, or they just showed bodyguard number 56 or whatever 14 different times. So in that case, it got a little bit better. In Season 2, they only introduced 35 characters. Across the 2 seasons of Dead City so far, they've introduced 90 characters. 39 seen and named characters, and 51 that are either unseen or unnamed. Let's head over to Daryl Dixon, Season 1. In Daryl Dixon, Season 1, they introduced named and seen characters, 66 characters. Bruh, that is more characters than Dead City Season 1 combined. That is like almost 3 times as many named characters they introduced in Dead City Season 1. And Season 2, it doesn't matter which one you pick, honestly. That's almost, out of named characters, that's almost a double of what they introduced from Dead City, just named characters in total. Are you kidding me? Going on to the unnamed characters in Season 1, or the unnamed and unseen characters, they introduced 24. So, and even on top of that, they introduced 24 named characters. So even with the unnamed and unseen characters, they still introduced more characters than either season introduced named characters, with a grand total of 90. So in Daryl Dixon Season 1 alone, they introduced the same amount of characters that Dead City has introduced in 2 seasons. Are you kidding me? Daryl Dixon Season 2, they introduced 31 named characters. It is a bit of a steep drop-off, but honestly, it makes sense. And you're still introducing a decent amount of characters. But here's the thing, you're still also introducing more named characters than either Dead City season decided to introduce ever. You almost introduced just as many characters as you did in Dead City Season 2, with just named characters alone in this case. Now for Daryl Dixon Season 2, they also introduced 28 unnamed or unseen characters, which honestly, that's a good average. Honestly, you know, kind of even. It is what it is. But again, you're introducing more unnamed and unseen characters than you did in Dead City Season 1 with just named characters. Same thing with Season 2. Like, what is going on here? For a grand total of 59 characters in Daryl Dixon Season 2. So they introduced 59 characters in Daryl Dixon Season 2. That's slightly more characters that they introduced compared to Dead City Season 1. 59 to 55. Bruh, what's going on here? And now in Daryl Dixon Season 3, they introduced 49 new named characters. They introduced 22 unnamed and unseen characters for a grand total of 71 characters. And then at the end, just between 3 seasons of Daryl Dixon, they've introduced 146 named characters, 74 unnamed and unseen characters for a grand total of 220 characters. When I talk about world building, yes, we're talking about the groups, we're talking about what's going on in the world, but for me, one of the most important aspects of world building is actually the characters themselves. In New York, you're showing us the Barazi who are supposedly like this big group of people, but usually we don't see more than like 10, maybe 15 people at a time. And out of those 10 or 15 people, only 2 of them are named. Compare that to something like the Abbey in Daryl Dixon, where there's about 10 people, but we know the majority of the people's names there. That's why I'm harping on this so much. One of the things that makes a series so immersive is the characters. It doesn't matter if Tommy is there in the background and he's only had one line across 5 episodes. It's the fact that I know there's a guy named Tommy and he's there, and it helps build up the world. Yes, we can have extras and that's whatever, but I think it's more impactful when you have these random little background extras and if they have a name. That's something that Dead City just does not want to do. It's almost like they're actively trying not to name their characters at times. If you go on the Walking Dead wiki fandom, there's like 15 Barazi pages, so it's like literally just Barazi 1, Barazi 2, Barazi 3, Barazi 4, Barazi 5, Barazi 6, etc, etc, etc. Are you telling me that like at least half of those people can't get a name? If this was The Walking Dead, like the main show Walking Dead, yes, we had a bunch of nameless saviors. I'm not going to deny that. We also got a bunch of saviors that randomly got names, even if they only appeared for like 5 seconds in the episode. Daryl Dixon does that. A character may appear for 5 seconds, but they'll still get a name. Dead City is like actively against that for whatever reason. And for me, it just shortens or like smallens the world so far, especially because some of these groups are supposed to be large. They're told to be large. The Barazi are supposed to be one of the strongest forces. Across 2 seasons, we've only gotten 5 named characters. Straight up. The Bloodshirts, again, that's supposedly another big faction, and we only got 2 named characters out of them. The Scragglers, again, it's supposed to be another big group, and we only got 1 named character from that whole group. The New Babylon Federation, that are supposedly just as big as the Commonwealth, for example, they barely have like 10 named people. And on top of that, 2 of those people, the only reason we know their names is because people contacted the actors who portrayed them, because they're extras, they're background extras, and we asked them, hey, did your character get a name? And they're like, yeah, my character's name was Larry and Yachty from like the script and the background props, and that's how we know. Now granted, Daryl Dixon does do the same thing where they will name characters and they won't reveal it, and then the actors will later on reveal it. Like, that's happened a lot, especially right now in Season 3. That happened with a lot of the characters in Limbo, where somebody contacted them, and one of the actors confirmed, like, oh yeah, like, our whole group had a name. Like, our whole group, like, every single character in our group had a name. For example, like, that happened. There was also one of the Alcazar soldiers, where he was contacted, and he revealed his name. Like, so that happens in Daryl Dixon, too. But it's one of those things, like, even without those, like, background knowledge, like, hey, let's contact the extra who portrayed this character, and see if they have a name reveal type of stuff, we still have a good portion of characters here that were introduced even by the show's standards, as opposed to Dead City, where, like, again, they're actively trying not to name any of their characters whatsoever, whether it be behind the scenes with background stuff, or with the props, or in the script. There's only, like, 2 examples, as opposed to, like, almost, like, 10, 15 examples for Daryl Dixon. And, like, that's the thing, like, the world building for this show is just, like, trash. I'm sorry. New Babylon, which is, like, their biggest contribution to the series, to the franchise, it's just forced world building. So much forced world building, because you're telling me they have this big reach, but people like the Commonwealth, like the CRM, you know, Padre, they haven't heard of this group, and we're 20 years into the apocalypse. And like I said before, we're 20 years into the apocalypse, and you're telling me that none of what happened in the previous, like, 5-6 years in Daryl Dixon, The Ones Who Live, etc., 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 that hasn't affected this series at all, even retroactively, as the show keeps progressing, as some of the other shows keep progressing in tandem with Dead City. Like, it's just ridiculous. I decided to do the math also for The Ones Who Live and for Tales of the Walking Dead. And Tales of the Walking Dead, they introduced 42 named characters. So again, Tales of the Walking Dead, that's a one-season thing that failed. They introduced 42 named characters, another 17 unnamed and unseen characters, for a total of 59 characters. Tales of the Walking Dead, a single season, a single series, special, whatever, they introduced more characters, again, than Dead City Season 1. The Ones Who Live, it's kind of an outlier here, really, where they introduced 14 new characters, physically seen characters, and then they introduced 6 characters who were unnamed or unseen for a grand total of 20. But see, that one kind of makes sense. And to be honest with you, even for me, that seems a little bit low, 20. But it's the fact that, hey, this is a one-season, one-shot thing. It's a special. Yes, they could have maybe named a few more CRM soldiers, but it is what it is. We're never going to see this series again. And in this case, I'm okay with it. If they were building upon this series of Bruce Season 2, Season 3, Season 4, and they were only introducing about 20 characters per season, then we'd have a problem. But no, this one kind of makes sense. This is the only exception that makes sense here. And that's on top of the fact that at least The Ones Who Live would have been more centralized to just the CRM, to just the Civic Republic. So they don't really have that need to introduce that many characters on top of that, realistically speaking. It's not like Dead City where they're trying to introduce a big group every season, or big groups every season, and then they only name like 2 or 3 people, not even, just 2 people from that group. And they're like, yeah, this is our group, and with like 2 people named. The world building for Dead City is just horrendous. The names, how many named characters you have in a season, is actually a huge indicator of that. I know it seems kind of trivial. I know it seems very dumb to be complaining about characters, background extras who get names for the characters and all of that. But if I'm being honest, those small details are one of those things that helps build out the world. Again, it's okay. Again, like I said, you have this big group of people, and only 2 people get names in Dead City, as opposed to Daryl Dixon, where you get a small group of like 10 people, and nearly every single character there has a name. It's like, that's insane to me. It should honestly be the other way around. If I'm being completely honest, it should really be the other way around, where you have this big group of 100 people at the Barrazi, and maybe a good 10 to 20 of them get a name. That makes sense. And then on the flip side for Daryl Dixon, it should be where you have this group of 10 people, and maybe only 2 or 3 of them get a name. But no, it's opposite. It's opposite. It's just ridiculous. And again, you're introducing more, and Daryl Dixon is introducing more characters in a show where the characters are actively traveling from place to place, and they're not really staying long, theoretically speaking. They're not really supposed to be staying long at each place, and they're still introducing more characters in Daryl Dixon than in Dead City, where they're kind of stuck in New York, realistically speaking, where they're stuck in New York, where they're stuck between New York and New Babylon. And it's like, bro, what are you doing? This is something I just wanted to talk about for some time, honestly. Like, I know it seems trivial. I very much realize that this is like the most trivial thing to complain about how many characters get a name or not. It goes back to the world building. The world building is just crap, and this is one of those things, looking at the small details. You always need to look at the small details of everything, and looking at the small details, it just baffles me that they kind of refuse to name any of their characters. And that's one of the things. It's one of those things, you don't have to like credit the people. Some of the characters who are named in Daryl Dixon, they're not really credited sometimes. It's one of those things that the character's name is just said offhandedly. Like, maybe somebody walks by and is like, hey Paul, how are you doing? And that's it. Like, Paul, his actor, isn't getting any credits on IMDb on the credits section, but we know, oh, that guy mentioned Paul, that guy's Paul, okay, now we know that guy's Paul. It kind of just builds up the world. Every time that Dead City has an opportunity to be like, hey, by the way, this Barrazi is actually called like Frank, Sam, Tommy, Lila, whatever. Every time they have an opportunity to do that, they're like, hey man, just do that. Hey man, do that. Instead of going like, hey Donnie, can you go do that? Hey Paul, can you go do that? Hey Samantha, can you go do that? Which is what Daryl Dixon does. They'll randomly give names to like any character just through dialogue. Again, Dead City is like actively against that for whatever reason. And it's like, why are you trying not to build up the world? And I just do not get it. I do not get it. Dead City has several upon several problems. And at the end of the day, it all just comes down to the writing. And they may have some great scenes, like that scene I mentioned at the beginning of the video between Negan and Maggie, where they talk about forgiveness. They may have some great scenes like that. Or with the Croat, when he tries to save Maggie on that glass bridge, for example. The battle in the cathedral at the very end of season 2. Brugo's death, my gosh, definitely one of the goriest deaths, or one of the most like amazing deaths we've had across the entire franchise. I'll give them that. But again, these great scenes, these great moments does not therefore rectify, does not magically repair how bad the show actually is, because again of their just bad and forced and just lack of wanting to world build. Again, this is just something random I've wanted to talk about for some time. And like I said, it is very random, but it's just something that's really bothered me. And I've never really seen anybody talk about this in regards to Dead City. Every time people talk about Dead City, they just talk about how bad it is because of the writing. They don't understand Maggie's motivation. They think that they're taking Maggie in a bad direction. Same thing with Herschel. They don't really understand what Negan and his role in all this is. No, criticizing the characters like Lucia, for example, which honestly Lucia was a bad character. Narvaez was just a really annoying character, to be honest with you. Pearl, like Pearly, why is he not doing anything of substance? I don't understand those critiques, do not get me wrong, but I've never seen anybody like critique the actual world building of this show, which I think is where it falls flat the most. So I just wanted to put this video out there into the ether and see what other people think. That's basically it for now. Comments all that time below, let me know on your thoughts on all of this, on your thoughts on world building and them naming or not wanting to name characters, and how much of an element that is to world building, how important that is to world building. Again, for me, it's like the small details, and those small details, again, just giving a few random background extras of a name for their character, I think will help the world building a lot. So yeah, what are your thoughts on all that? Comments all that to below, let me know. And that's basically it for now. This is Daniel Mart signing off.